it'd be a logistical nightmare. That's why the conservatives want to pass the exit ramp, and now some liberals do too. Because what it would do is it would basically, like if Stillwater said, and I'm not suggesting that we would, but if we said we don't want to be United Methodist anymore, then the annual conference could not take our property. That property would go with us where that exit ramp to be implemented. How did we get here? I mean, we got here, it's not been one thing. I mean, we've been arguing about human sexuality in the United Methodist Church since 1972. That's when the language went into the Book of Discipline. And that language is homosexual practice is incompatible with Christian teaching. And we've been arguing about that ever since. But we started out with about 12 million members in 1968. We have about 12.5 million members today, but about 5.5 million of those live in Africa. No, about 5 million live in Africa. And so the demographics of United Methodism have changed immensely. And so, whereas I think the progressives thought that over time the United Methodist Church would eventually moderate and then utterly liberalize its position on homosexual practice. What's happened is that with the growth of Christianity in the global South, and in particular African Christianity, African Methodism, the opposite has happened, and the margins are getting larger, which is why we came to this crisis point, because there is a group within the church that will not accept the decisions of the General Conference. And you can have Big Tent Methodism as long as you have a method for resolving conflict. And everybody abides and agrees to that method of resolving conflict. Once a group within the church rejects the way in which we resolve conflict, then it's only a matter of time before we disintegrate organizationally. And that's what's happened. And we have a lot of bishops in the church who agree with the progressives and have refused to enforce the discipline, despite the fact that the primary job of a bishop in the United Methodist Church is to enforce the discipline of the church. So it's been a long time coming, and I'm obviously in the conservative side of this. I'm on the board of the Wesleyan Covenant Association, and I don't want to denigrate anyone who's on the other side of this argument. A lot of these people are my friends, and I love them, I care for them. I don't know that we can be in the same church together moving forward. They have their reasons of conscience, and I think that's fine. That's okay. But the price of that will probably be that what we think of as the United Methodist Church today will either disintegrate or be very different within a few years. I mean, we've had a large-scale failure of leadership from the bishops. There's no nice way to say that. That's what's happened.
There's no way to police the bishops?
Unfortunately, there's not, because the bishops are governed by jurisdictions. Like, for example, if in the Western jurisdiction, in 2016, they elected the first openly gay bishop and consecrated her. Now, that is a violation of the Book of Discipline on several levels. When a complaint is filed, that's handled within the jurisdiction. And it's overseen by the bishops within that jurisdiction. So it's the Western jurisdiction bishops, all of whom think that the discipline is wrong. And so they have refused to do anything. And there's no larger body apart from the General Conference, which meets only every 4 years, that can do anything about that. Now, we would have the capacity at a General Conference to vote every bishop up or down, which I actually think would be a fantastic idea. But bishops don't have accountability because of jurisdictions. It's definitely an old boys and girls network. And the Council of Bishops seems to have a very intense process of socialization within it. So up until very recently, no bishops would break ranks. Even very conservative bishops would not break ranks with the council. Now Bishop Lowry has, and a couple of others, but prior to that, it was really unheard of. We had a bishop from this jurisdiction who actually came out of, I think, this annual conference, maybe 15 years ago, that wrote a book denying the Trinity, the virgin birth, the incarnation, the bodily resurrection of Christ. He was brought up on charges and found to be not guilty, which shows you how rigged the game is.
Sounds a lot like the Sadducees and Pharisees, doesn't it?
That's a nicer way of putting it than I. I will say Bishop Palmer has tried to be very even-handed through all of this. You know, I respect him. He's in a tough position because his conference is divided right down the middle. And he's tried as hard as he can to handle all this with integrity. So right now, you know, the church is really, the politics of the church really has three significant groups within it. One are conservatives, and they're probably now represented more than anyone by the Wesleyan Covenant Association. Then there are people called the Uniting Methodists, or sometimes they call themselves centrists, who want the one church plan to pass. And then there are progressives who feel that the one church plan is not progressive enough, and that we simply need to remove all restrictive language out of the Book of Discipline and impose a progressive sexual ethic on the entire denomination. Now that group is the smallest, but they're loud. They are very vocal. Well, I apologize for ruining your evening tonight. Yes.
I think this is important. We face something. My wife and I attended a Lutheran church in the Springfield area because we couldn't find a Methodist church that supported programs for our teenagers. And we witnessed that divide occur when the new Lutheran Conference Synod, proper name, was formed. Ours went with the conservative. We lost 25% of our membership. This is not a small issue. And our church is probably facing something similar if such a split occurs. I don't know what the impact on our membership will be, but I would expect as a board, that's what we're looking at. There'll be something like that will occur, however the church decides to go. So it's significant. We will not escape some impact regardless of the decision that's made.
I think the decision that will have the least, all these decisions will affect the local churches. The decision that will have the least impact on most local churches is a traditional plan. And the one that will have the most impact will be the one church plan.
If the Wesleyan Covenant Association were to form a new denomination, do you think that would bring about changes in things that relate to this board would be appointments, apportionments, these kind of things? Do you think that there would be substantial changes, or would they be trying to kind of mimic current Methodist practices on those things?
There would be substantial changes. There would be continuity in some practices. But, currently, the United Methodist Church is, in one way, all of this, we could put a positive spin on this and say the United Methodist Church needs pruning, because we have a huge amount of waste that takes place in the church right now. General boards and agencies that are bloated, that function without accountability to the larger church. I don't know what your politics is, and I don't care, honestly. The General Board of Churches Society is a left-wing lobbying group, and if you are left-wing politically, great. I don't mean to say that that's a bad thing, but what my complaint is that it's not representative of the church. And we own a building on Capitol Hill. And the building sits right beside the Supreme Court of the United States. And that building is and it started out as a temperance building, actually. Now that's worth a huge amount of money. I mean, that's I can't even imagine how much that is worth. We have probably $500 million in reserves stowed away that we're not spending in this church. You know, I am on the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry, and I look at what they do and what their staffing is and these kinds of things, and it's just bloated. And so I think a good thing that can come out of this, whether we have a split or not, is that there will be a pruning down of the denomination. We have 13 seminaries, and we don't need that many. And I say that as someone who works in one of them, although I definitely think we need mine. But, and there was a plan called Plan UMC in 2012, I think, to prune down, to simplify, streamline the United Methodist Church in this regard, and it passed General Conference actually, and then was struck down by the Judicial Council afterwards, so it didn't move ahead. So, I mean, there's definitely upside to this in that we are an entrenched, large bureaucratic organization, and we are off mission because of these things, and we need to get back on mission. And the mission of the United Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And since we formed in 1968, we've lost 5 million members in the United States. We've made a lot of disciples in Africa, or they have made disciples. Africans have made disciples in Africa. But just having been there, I can tell you, you know, if the African church is the child of the American church, we have neglected our child. We have left our pastors there without theological education and without resources. So the church I just went to in Nairobi was one of the poorest places I've ever been in my life. I mean, I've been in Cuba 4 times. I've never seen anything like this. And people are, you know, living in slums with 1 million people. So, what could we do, you know, if we weren't encumbered by fighting and by bureaucracy and by bishops who are making $150,000 a year plus housing to not do their jobs? And this is an unconscionable use of money. And so I think that maybe God is allowing us to go through this as a kind of pruning to get us out of our complacency and get us back on mission. Otherwise, you know, if Christians in the United States don't get back on mission, sooner or later the United States is going to look like Western Europe. I mean, the de-Christianization of North America is accelerating. So there's some urgency to some of this. And if the UMC won't get back on track, then the WCA will form, and I'll go with them.
David, I have a question.
Yes.
What do we do as congregants and members of the United Methodist Church? I mean, we don't even know who our representatives are to the annual conference.
Well, you can get a list of representatives to General Conference from the annual conference office and write to them about what you think. I would think that at this point, most of them have made up their minds about what they want to do, but it's still certainly your prerogative to contact them about that. And I don't assume to know what your positions are on any of these things, but I think you can support organizations that you agree with, and I think that you can inform yourself of what's happening in the larger church and help other people in the church to understand what's going on. You know, I applaud you for having this conversation now, because a lot of churches throughout the denomination have no idea what's coming, and they're going to get hit like a freight train after February 2019, whatever happens. And so this is going to be difficult, But I think we need to inform ourselves, and we need to go in clear-eyed about what's at stake and what the realistic outcomes are likely to be.
What's the right time to start letting members of our church know what's going on? So I'd say most of them don't know what's going on.
I think now is the time. I defer to John on this. And I think you want to have these conversations very gently with people, because these are very, very difficult subjects to have conversations about. People have a lot of, emotional investment in them. And so we want to have those conversations, but we want to have them carefully and sensitively with the people in the congregations, understanding that issues around these matters are complex, and we still have to care for each other in the midst of that. I think people need to start getting prepared, because once this, whatever happens, it's going to hit the headlines of like New York Times.